welcome to the Acid Trash Jamboree, and to a video covering a small amount of music by one of the channel's many heroes, guitar mangler and all-round sound master Matthew Bower. I say a small amount, as simply put, the man has been involved with a hell of a lot of stuff down the years, starting out in the 1980s, during that whole explosion of UK power electronics and industrial music, and carrying on up to the present day. So yeah, I'd be here for several days straight if I was stupid enough to try and cover everything that I own by him. Okay, so Bower's best known and most acclaimed project is Skullflower, which was formed in London in 1986. Now, as I'll be touching on as I make my way through this video, Skullflower, as with pretty much all of Bower's projects, has covered multiple musical styles in its 40-year existence. Though during its original run at least, it was ostensibly a predominantly instrumental, psychedelic noise rock band, influenced by US maniacs like Butthole Surfers, Flipper, and Drunks with Guns, UK contemporaries Head of David and Godflesh, as well as vintage space and krautrock. And yeah, we start this selection with 1992's third Gatekeeper, which, rather unsurprisingly, was Skullflower's third full length, recorded by a trio lineup of Bower, drummer and vocalist Stuart Dennison, and bassist Anthony DeFranco, following the departure of key early member Stefan Jaworszyn. Now, compared to the violent, turbulent chaos of their earliest work, which reached a peak with the classic Zayman a couple of years prior, this one is just a few notches less exciting. It's still a trippy noise rock album at its core, with big lumbering fuzz bass lines and cyclical, minimalistic drum patterns backing up the tidal washes of electric guitar. But yeah, without Jaworszyn's input, overall, the sound is noticeably more subdued. Not that this is a bad album, of course. Indeed, taken on its own merits, there's still much to enjoy here, not least the super stoned sludge of Opener, Can You Feel It, the nutty King Crimson deconstruction Lark's Tongues, and the much-loved centrepiece Rotten Sun. Clocking in at just over an hour though, and with little in the way of variation from track to track, the album does end up a bit of a slog when listened to as a whole, bogged down by a clutch of less inspired efforts, which are powered by hackneyed two-note riffs that sound like they took all of 10 seconds to write. Your mileage may vary, of course. Some will be able to lose themselves in the full programme of bare bones, barbarian jamming, though if you're anything like me, you'll more than likely just wish they'd chopped off some of the flab. So, not the greatest start to this Bower odyssey. As I said, the stuff that precedes third Gatekeeper is more my cup of tea, as far as Skullflower's big, doomy riff-based early stuff is concerned. And whilst it's very similar sonically, I actually prefer the follow-up album, Last Shot at Heaven, to this one, though that might be just because it was the first one I heard by them. Still, when this album's good, it's very good indeed. Okay, so in order to hopefully minimise confusion, I'm attempting to cover these CDs in chronological order. So next up we have Total and Sky Blue Void from 1994. That said, the Total name actually predates Skullflower. Yeah, following the breakup of the power electronics trio Pure, which was Bower's first project, Total was conceived as a vessel for his solo music, though many of the releases still feature guest musicians, including this one, which sports contributions from John Godbert, Russell Smith, and Simon Wickham-Smith, all familiar names no doubt if you're a follower of this scene. And yeah, Godbert helps him get things off to a deceptively quiet start on Tannery No. 1, blowing calmly on an Egyptian twin reed instrument, over Bower's jangly, nylon string guitar strum, the piece sounding uncannily like some 70s free folk jam, in the vein of Kalakakra or Siloa. Once we hit Hustler though, Sky Blue Void starts to bring the noise. Yeah, if anything, this is a sound that I'm sure a lot of people most readily associate with Bower. Freeform, droning, multi-layered, effects pedal chaos, heavy on the electric guitars and very much informed by Lou Reed's Metal Machine music. Mercurius Duplex and Nowhere Shining are a touch less dense, Bower adding long, mournful vocal tones to the former's mixture of high string skree and vacuum cleaner whoosh, whilst the latter features our man and Russell Smith in free improv mode, scratching and plinking around on their fretboards, while Simon Wickham-Smith goes off on some weird Sun Ra organ fantasia in the background. This just leaves Lift Every Voice and Azure Dragon, which between them make up over half an hour of noisy bliss. The first one, a screeching speaker shredder, as fearsome as any of the stuff Bower cooked up in the 2000s, whilst the closer is altogether more psychedelic, the guitar torture cocooned by gorgeous layers of woozy drone. So yeah, really cool album overall. The sonics matching perfectly with the wonderfully evocative title and artwork. Next up, it's back to Skullflower for a couple of albums, starting with 1995's Argon. Okay, so reiterating what I said earlier, pretty much all of Bower's bands and solo projects have at some point or other shifted their sound radically, to the point where they've either ended up predicting future projects of his, or they've simply morphed into a coexisting one in all but name. And yeah, basically, this album could have been released under the Total moniker, and no one would have batted an eyelid. I mean, while Skullflower had already started to leave behind the weighty, riff-based tracks on albums like Obsidian Shaking Codex, and my personal favourite, Carved into Roses, in favour of much looser and more improvised music, this goes even further out there. Yeah, basically what we get here are 4 huge slabs of free blowing, ranging from 15 to 30 minutes in length, all performed at different times and in different places between summer 94 and winter 95, but sounding pretty cohesive in spite. Indeed, the first and third pieces are concert recordings, captured in London and Amsterdam respectively, whilst track 2 was recorded at the Tannery in Ulverston, Lancashire, which I'm guessing was Bower's home at the time, as it gets credited on a bunch of other 90s releases, among them the aforementioned Sky Blue Void. Then the last piece was recorded in a regular studio in London. So yeah, if you like it rough and ready, then you'll be all over the first hour of this. The lo-fi recording quality, lending a nasty and trashy but not unlistenably harsh edge to the combinations of Bower and Russell Smith's thin, raw feedback drones, Stuart Dennison's splatter-clatter drum work, and John Godbert's atonal reed interjections. The Tannery piece is especially raw in that regard, no doubt due to it being recorded in a more intimate space. Dennison in particular making a hell of a racket on his kit over the buzzsaw guitar noise, some insane kazoo abuse, plus a kind of playful, toy keyboard sounds that would later start to crop up with Bower's Sunroof project, more on whom in a second. The hulkingly huge live Amsterdam piece gives it a run for its money though. Yeah, recorded at the Paradiso venue, where Skullflower were on the bill alongside Disco Inferno, Huge Baby, and Peril, as part of a festival called Tegan Tonen 1995. This is the most guitar-heavy of the four. At first, the painful peaks of feedback melding seamlessly with Godbert's high sax squealing, before things climax in a huge wash of free drone nirvana. After all this, the studio piece that caps things off sounds positively high fidelity in comparison. And yeah, this one is the most explicitly jazzy of the album, thanks to the additional sax work from Tim Hodgkinson, formerly of Henry Cow, who doesn't hold back for a second. Yeah, Godbert must have been in his element, freaking out alongside this legend. Their horns very much the stars of the show here. The guitars taking a backseat role, and the drums entirely absent. It's amusing to hear fellow guest Philip Best, then of Whitehouse and Ramley, trying to keep up with them, his whistle sounding a bit feeble alongside their mighty horns. Anyways, I recall not being overly sold on this back when I first got it in the 2000s, most probably due to its lack of riffs, but revisiting it now, as I'm sure you can tell, I found myself getting more enthused about it than some of the rock-based stuff that I've also been on about. And just to reiterate, Argon certainly makes a cool companion piece to total albums like Caspar Hauser and Buffin the Celestial Muffin. Next up is Transformer, also released back in '95 and mostly recorded that same year, again in assorted places, houses, studios, live venues and radio stations. Unlike Argon though, this one ends up sounding a bit of a hodgepodge overall, opening with a couple of brief throwaway pieces, including a surprisingly straightforward and therefore rather anonymous instrumental cover of Jefferson Airplane's 3/5 of a Mile in 10 Seconds. After this, we hit the main meat of the collection, starting with the enjoyable mellow modal feedback drone out, cut loose 1+11, followed by a couple more covers, an equally drony, raga-esque Fantasia on Syd Barrett's Golden Hair, which features another whistle freakout, this time from John Godbert, then an 11-minute stab at the folky standard Morning Dew. Yeah, recorded at the same session as the Jefferson Airplane piece, with Bower's brother Philip on guest guitar. Again, this could be just about any combo of garage rockers playing, so after a few minutes it does start to outstay its welcome. Not that I've ever really been a big fan of this song, no matter who's doing it. The live recording Cicada is the last of the epics, and it's probably the highlight of the whole CD, with frantic violin scrabbling and more of that free improv guitar plinking over a backdrop of pleasingly raw, free-form doom chords. As with Argon though, this could have been issued as a total piece and nobody would have known any different. Surf Creature is the last of the 1995 pieces, and it's a strange home recording by Russell Smith, who I should point out was a fully fledged member of Skullflower at this point. That doesn't stop it from sounding pretty out of place, even on this rather weird selection of bits and pieces. It's not terrible though, again just a bit on the throwaway side, alternating between vaguely dreamy, surfy guitar strums and more frenzied sections, whilst a stoned-sounding lady provides a bit of commentary on top, taking things almost in a Cosmic Jokers type direction for a couple of minutes. Then, tagged on to the end, we get both sides of a 1994 7-inch single, the soft-to-loud sludge grunge dynamics of Ponyland, and the reverb-heavy Fake Revolt, which sounds a bit like the Stooges playing inside a giant washing machine. So yeah, as I keep saying, Transformer isn't the most stellar collection of Skullflower jams by any means, though if you're a Bower nut like me, then there's more than enough goodness here to make up for the missteps. Next, we have a double CD by what is easily my favourite Bower project of all, the aforementioned Sunroof. Yeah, this massive collection from 1999 is entitled Delicate Autobahn Under Construction, and thanks to the amazing VHF records, it was the first widely available Sunroof release, following a couple of ultra-scarce private tapes and the limited to 50 copies CDR slipstream. Now, while Sunroof would gradually get more noisy and aggro as the years went by, again to the point where it was hard to tell it apart from much of the other stuff he was churning out at the time, to begin with at least. According to Bower, the point of Sunroof was to make the nicest nice music in the nice universe, or words to that effect. Not that this is necessarily the sound of Bower completely mellowing out or anything. Nah, there's still plenty of aggressive, distorted guitar and feedback in evidence, as on Disc 1 openers, Misty Spring Morning and Valentine. The amps are just turned down a few notches for the most part, ending up another layer of the soundscape rather than the main focal point. So yeah, this is definitely the friendliest and most colourful of his projects, at least. Instrumentally speaking, there's also a lot of shimmering organ or keyboard droning going on, giving each piece a heavily modal feel, on top of which Bower and his cast of guest players add assorted vocals, whistles, scraped and bowed metal sounds, percussion, violin, and toy instruments. Yeah, if there's such a style as trash raga, then this lot were certainly playing it here. Regarding the guest players, again, John Godbert features, as well as other familiar names like Neil Campbell, who Godbert would join in Vibra Cathedral Orchestra, the guys from Jazzfinger, Lee Stocco of Culver fame, Ashtray Navigation's Phil Todd, and Richard Youngs, more on whom in a second, though unfortunately the liner notes don't specify who did what or on which tracks they played. The sound is pretty hazy and lo-fi for the duration, the larger ensemble works in particular sounding like they were recorded live to cassette, though miraculously there's no unwanted clipping or speaker distortion rearing its ugly head at any point. And as became the norm with Bower at some point in the 90s, the pieces cut in and out abruptly with no gaps of silence between them. So each disc is presented as a continuous, gushing river of sound. I'd be here for hours if I was to talk about each and every piece, but highlights-wise, from Disc 1 I particularly like the epic, stately metal trees, which sounds very much like its title would suggest, and the glowing free folk of The Last Lemur, with its improvised, jazz-style drum clatter. Then over on the mostly percussion-free Disc 2, after an opening salvo of extra foggy and mystical-sounding pieces, I'm fond of distorted weird-outs like the two-part Drive-By and the exquisitely trippy swirler Shiny Tunnel, which will just about make you levitate. It's all good though, as far as I'm concerned. Still, I'm sure there are many out there who'd level the same complaint at it as I did with Third Gatekeeper, that there's too much of the same thing here. Maybe so, but for my tastes, when I'm in the mood for Sunroof, there's pretty much no other music I'd rather be listening to. Whilst I'd hardly call this completely organic, Delicate Autobahn is definitely one of the least electronically modified Sunroof releases overall. As I say, with a lot of acoustic instrumentation present throughout. Yeah, as well as getting ever noisier, once the 2000s hit, Bower would introduce more effects pedals, processors, and synthesizers to the mix, upping the psychedelic goop factor tenfold. And speaking of heavy effects and gooey electronic processing, next up, we have the 2002 Youngsbower collaboration between Bower and the aforementioned Richard Youngs, entitled Relayer, a sequel of sorts to their earlier joint album. Yeah, in addition to Young's guest spots on numerous Sunroof and Skullflower releases, the pair had actually already done an album together back in the mid-90s, entitled Psych Realm. And yeah, whilst that one is a noisy improvised session of electric guitar torture, Relayer is a much more luscious affair, with Bower in full-on Sunroof mode, and Young's slap bang in the middle of his psychedelic folktronica period. So yeah, it's a heady brew to say the least. Indeed, sandwiched between a two-part Terry Riley-styled minimalist jam entitled Eagle Like a Fly, Fly Like an Eagle, we get such delights as the shuffling pink sky blossom, which points the way forward to Sunroof's 2003 krautrock-inspired masterpiece Clouds. The shoegaze guitar meets music box dreaminess of Welding the Sea, and the arrhythmic chaos of New Martian Sun Tunnel, which sounds like the entire Harmonia catalogue playing simultaneously. I'm also quite fond of Iridescent Hose Down, a crazy melding of smeared acoustic guitar drone, zapping freeform synthesizers, and wheezing harmonica, though actually the whole CD is pretty damned cool, as I say, fitting in very nicely with the other things these fellas were up to in the early 2000s. Regarding the title, obviously there's a Yes album also entitled Relayer, though in this case it would seem the pair were referencing the obscure late 70s prog rock band from Houston, Texas. Yeah, take a look at Relayer's Lone LP and see if you notice any similarities between the two sleeves. Lastly for today, we have another Skullflower album, Orange Canyon Mind from 2005, which was the second release of the new millennium to bear the Skullflower moniker after a break of around 7 years. And yeah, considering it was basically just another Bower solo project by now, this is a very different proposition to the Skullflower of the 80s and 90s, though I guess it's not quite as different as it would end up shortly after. Yeah, before it became another rough and ready noise vessel with albums like Tribulation, there's still quite a lot of noticeable rock guitar riffing in evidence on this one, with Bower again taking influence from the heavier end of the spectrum, as he'd done frequently during Skullflower's initial run. The difference here is that there's no organic rhythm section backing him up anymore, and that said guitars are coated in the aforementioned layers of industrial strength, psychedelic gloop, flangers, phasers, ring modulators, harmonizers, you name it, to the point where, yet again, at times we could be listening to any one of his other projects. For example, the opener, Starry Wisdom, could have fit quite easily onto the Sunroof album from that same year, Silver Bear Mist, whilst the ultra-strange Goat of 1,000 Young floats punishingly high synth frequencies over the kind of mutant black metal noise chaos that we heard on Green by Hototogizu, also from 2005. Weirdly enough, Hototogizu, which is the Japanese word for hummingbird, started life circa the millennium as yet another Bower solo project, very much in the same nice music vein as early Sunroof, though with the addition of US guitar experimentalist Marcia Bassett a couple of years after, it too morphed into a vehicle for ultra-harsh amplifier worship. Speaking of which, there's more than a taste of that kind of thing here, as on Annihilating Angel, which pits hissing static against dramatic explosions of doom guitar, whilst the closer, Forked Lightning, does away with any notion of discernible musicality, smearing everything out into a heady blur of fuzz. Much of the rest draws from wigged out 70s proto-metal and 90s stoner sludge, trudging along hypnotically in a haze of saturated power chords and speaker slicing wah-wah chaos, with things like the title track and Star Hill most closely resembling the old-school Skullflower approach. So that's a fair chunk of Matthew Bower music for you. I've tentatively subtitled this Part 1, as I'll no doubt cover a bunch more of his stuff in the future. Until then, thanks for watching. Please check out the archive for more blather about underground music, and I'll catch you again soon on the Acid Trash Jamboree.